Hello everyone, welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. Today I am going to go through all the books I read in September, which was 9, which is quite good. It was a mix of genres, quite good overall in terms of like star ratings, so that's pretty good. And yeah, definitely some like surprises and books that I enjoyed, so let's get into it. So first up is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, which is a hangover from August because this was in my August TBR, because in August I read just books from Women in Translation because it was Women in Translation month. I didn't quite get around to this, or I think I started it like at the end of August and then finished it at the beginning of September, so that is why it is in this month. And yeah, I'm really happy to have finally read this because it's like such a famous book. And whenever people talk about translations, they always talk about Elena Ferrante, so I was really excited to read it. So if you don't know, this is translated from Italian, and Elena Ferrante is a pseudonym? Is that the right word? Yeah, pseudonym. So nobody actually knows who the author is, because that's not their real name, which I think is really cool and interesting, and hopefully one day we will find out. But yeah, amazing that somebody with that can become this like well-known and renowned, and it's definitely a feat of achievement. So yeah, very happy to have finally read this, and overall I did enjoy it. So the story follows Eleanor and Leela, and I think it's in the 1950s that it starts, but it does kind of progress through time, so becomes a bit later in time, and it's basically about their friendship. It's about how they live their lives, what they do at school, how they decide to like progress with their education, the other people that they meet at their school, their families, and like the feuds that are going on with the families in the town. So it's basically just about them and their friendship, and I found that perspective really interesting. What I said on Instagram when I finished this was the book really reminded me of Margaret Atwood's Cat's Eye, which is similar in that it's two girls who are like the centre of the narration, and I always find books that are narrated by children or like adolescents, teenagers, really interesting because there's always like an undertone to the narrative of like ignorance, whether that's intentional or unintentional because of their age, and I find that really interesting, and just to see their perspective on the world. So yeah, I really like that. So I did really enjoy the narrative, and the story was like easy enough to follow and interesting enough, but overall I just didn't find it that memorable. I don't think this is going to be a book that like I get excited about when people talk about it. Now I have heard from other people that the rest of the series like elevates this one, so part of me does want to continue because maybe I just need to become a little bit more invested in like the world and the characters, and like I said, I did enjoy it. I thought the narration was good and I was really interested in like the overall storyline. I just think it's a little bit forgettable. So let me know if you have read it, because I know how famous this book is and I'm sure there are a lot of people who really love it, but yeah, I think for me it's a 4-star read rather than a 5-star one, just because yeah, I don't think I'm gonna think about it much now that I've finished it. And next is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This was a highly anticipated read for me. I only bought it like I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, but I really wanted to read it, so I put it into my September basket, and then yeah, I read it. Now this has like been doing the rounds on social media for a while now. People adore it, and it's like I've seen nothing but praise for it, so I was really excited to read it. And if you have seen my previous videos, then you'll know I fell in love with a book by Gabrielle Zevin when I was about 16 called Elsewhere, which is about an afterlife, and it's like a young adult book, so a little bit younger than this one, but yeah, I really loved it, so I was excited to read more from her. Now the book centres very much around video games, so the two protagonists are Sam and Sadie. They meet when they're children, and the book is really about their friendship from when they're children into adulthood, and how their lives kind of intertwine with each other's, how they leave each other's lives for a while and then come back into it, and like their opinion of each other, their like individual journeys as well as the journeys they go on together, and I think ultimately the book is basically about their friendship, similarly to My Brilliant Friend actually. Now I did really like how immersive the book was. It very much immerses you in the world of like being a young creative, and also obviously in the world of video games. I'm not sure what Gabrielle Zevin's experience with video games is, but I imagine she loves them quite a lot, because not only were there like really cool just descriptions of video games, but there are quite a few like video games in this book that don't exist in real life. So obviously Gabrielle Zevin, I presume, had to come up with those concepts, which is really cool. And yeah, I really love that side of it. As someone who doesn't really play many video games, like, you know, I do the occasional Mario Kart. Yeah, it was really cool to be immersed in that side of it, and it's definitely very accessible even if you're not someone who plays video games, so that was really brilliant. Now ultimately the reason I was excited to read this was because of Sam and Sadie's relationship. I'd heard that it was just a beautiful exploration of like their connection to each other and how people are sort of tied together through these invisible bonds throughout their life, even if they don't see each other for years. So I was really excited for that, and in execution I think it was done well. I'm going to describe this very much like I described My Brilliant Friend, in that I did really like it. I liked the story, I liked the characters, I loved the descriptions, the narrative. I thought it was really beautifully written. There are parts of the plot which are really sort of shocking, but it was done really well, and I think it keeps you gripped. It's quite a long book. Yeah, almost 500 pages, which, you know, for like just a contemporary book is quite long. So, you know, there's something to be said for the fact that this many people can love it when it is a long book. But yeah, I did like it. However, my main frustration with it is that it very much falls foul to the miscommunication trope, because so many of the issues in the book could have been fixed if Sam and Sadie just talked to each other, just communicated, just expressed how they were feeling, talked it out. You know, the issues would have been over very quickly and the whole thing would have been solved. As we know, or as you know if you read a lot, if you've seen this just come up, miscommunication tropes are very frustrating, because in reality that's just wouldn't happen in real life. People will probably just have a conversation and the issue would fix itself. So I do wish that would have played out differently, because there are so many other parts of the book I really loved, but ultimately it just can't be a 5-star read, because I just found that element to it very frustrating. So again, it's another 4-star read, but I would still really recommend it, and I kind of get the hype. I don't think I completely get the hype, but I kind of get the hype. So yeah, it was good. Next is The Pull of Stars by Emma Donoghue. Emma Donoghue wrote Room, which was made into an Oscar-winning film. I'm pretty sure it won an Oscar. Yeah, so if you've recognised that name or you know what Room is, this is the same author. So The Pull of Stars is historical fiction. It's set in 1918, so early 20th century in Ireland, and it mainly focuses on the flu epidemic that's happening at the time. So it's set in a hospital mainly, a little bit outside of the hospital as well, but mainly in a hospital, mainly just in one room actually, and it focuses on a nurse who works there who has just turned 30, or she's about to turn 30, and about her sort of contemplating where she is in life while also trying to deal with these patients who are dying of flu. Now the patients that she's dealing with, I can't remember whether it's specifically a maternity ward or whether she just happens to have a lot of pregnant people there, but there's quite a few of her patients are either pregnant or they've had a baby, or you know, there's a reason for them to be on a maternity ward. So on top of that, she's having to deal with this flu that is going around. Now there's a assistant who comes in to help her, who's not qualified to be a nurse, doesn't know anything about what to do, but she comes in to assist our main character just with the work that needs to be done in the hospital. And the book kind of has two sides to it. It's one about it being 1918 in Ireland and the political tensions that were going on at that time, as well as the flu that is killing a lot of people. And then the other side of it is our two main characters and their relationship. I don't remember their names. Julia Power and Bridie Sweeney. So Julia and Bridie are our two women at the centre of this, so the other side of it is about their relationship. Now, what I really loved about this book is how the author made the choice to set it literally over, I think it's like maximum 3 days, 4 days. It's a really short period of time, and like I said at the beginning, it's mainly set in this one room, and I really love that. It made it feel really claustrophobic and immersive, and I think that beautifully reflects the time. You know, they're having to deal with this awful outbreak of flu that's literally killing people right in front of them, and they are struggling to cope with its impact. So I loved that. I thought that was a really great choice. And I also loved the two characters' relationships. I thought so many elements of that were really beautiful and explored beautifully as well. And it did make the overall, again, going back to the fact it was only set over a few days, it made everything very intense, including their relationship, which I did really love. I think ultimately, I'm not going to give this book a 5-star rating, and I don't actually have a reason why. It was just missing something for me. I thought the ending really saved it. I think up until the ending it might not have even been 4 stars, it might have been like 3.5. The ending was really great, and so it's definitely a 4-star read, and I understand why people really love it, and I can't even tell you why it's not a 5-star read. There was just something missing. There was something for me that just couldn't quite push it over the edge to a 5-star read, but I still would really recommend it. I think it's a great immersive historical fiction. It's got great character relationships and brilliant writing as well, and it's not too long. It's just under 300 pages, so yeah, I would really recommend it, even though I couldn't give it 5 stars. Next is the Peneloped by Margaret Atwood. This was recommended to me by a friend because I love Greek mythology. I also quite like Margaret Atwood, so I'm surprised this wasn't on my radar. But yeah, it was recommended to me, so I bought it and I read it last month. So again, this is a relatively short one. Yeah, just under 200 pages, and also my edition has quite a lot of blank spaces as well, so you can get through it pretty quickly, and like it has huge margins. So yeah, it's actually a pretty quick read. Now the story is kind of a retelling of Penelope's story. Penelope is the wife of Odysseus, and he is like a very famous Greek hero, and Penelope in most of the retellings of his story is just his wife. So this book really aims to give Penelope a voice, which I really loved. I've been reading a lot of feminist retellings of Greek mythology recently, and I really love that they tell the other side of the story and that we get to hear so much that we don't hear in like traditional retellings, which is really great. So I love that. It's also just a very like beautifully lyrical narrative. You could absolutely see how this would translate well onto like a stage, being like spoken word or just a play. Like the performance of it would be amazing. Now my issue with the book, which I think will be a bit divisive, because depending on how much you're into Greek mythology, you will either agree or disagree with me. I think the problem with this book is you cannot read it without knowing anything about Greek mythology or anything about Penelope to begin with. It doesn't really give you a clear-cut story. It doesn't really give you like a play-by-play of what happened to Penelope, or like her life or her marriage or anything like that. There are elements of it that we do explain, but I think I only understood them fully because I've read other stories with Odysseus and Penelope in it. So I wouldn't go into this blindly. I wouldn't go into this if you haven't read any other retellings. I'd recommend reading a retelling of their marriage and their story to begin with, and then moving on to this. I did really love how it flipped between Penelope and the chorus line. Again, that just kind of played into like the lyrical element of it, and it was really beautifully written. But like I said, I can't really recommend it unless you have that knowledge beforehand. For me, this was a 3-star read because I could really appreciate it, but I think overall it's hard to connect to it unless you know all the details of the story already. Next was a graphic novel called The Sad Ghost Club 2. This is by Lizzie Medlings, and this is obviously number 2. Number 1 is The Sad Ghost Club 1, which I read probably a year ago, or maybe even more than that. It was a little while ago now. And yeah, these books are really great. They're really heartwarming and lovely, and I would really recommend them. They mainly focus on sort of like mental health and being struggling with your mental health, struggling to be sociable or to talk to other people. So with anxiety or depression, they really kind of cover those topics, and it is mainly just one ghost who is our protagonist, who struggles with these things, meets another ghost who also struggles with those things, and finds this really great connection. Book 1 was really lovely. I really enjoyed it, and book 2 similarly covers still great themes, is a really beautiful like story, and I loved the connection between the characters, but ultimately I didn't like it as much as number 1 just because it didn't have as much substance. When I read it, I said to my friend that there's just not as much like dialogue in it, which, you know, graphic novels don't have that much dialogue anyway, so you can see like the little like kind of speech bubbles or the little narrations which tell you a bit about what's going on, and the first one just had more, so the book felt like it had more to it. That being said, it still has really beautiful illustrations and is still a really great book, and I will happily read anything more in this series, but yeah, I think number 1 was just a little bit better. The other thing that irked me about this book is I really struggled to tell the ghosts apart. So in the first one it's a bit easier because it's mainly the first ghost and then the second one. This one, we're getting more and more ghosts and they all look the same, or they all look the same to me. They kind of have like really little differences, like some of them have sleeves or like trouser legs so you can see see, but like you really have to remember which one's which and which one has the legs, and yeah, I think it's actually really difficult to tell them apart. So like a tiny point, but I think I did prefer number 1, so I give this one 4 stars. Next up is a reread for me, which is Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. I read this a long time ago, like probably 10 years ago. It was ages. I could barely remember the story, to be honest. That's how long ago it was. But I really wanted to give it a reread because I love dystopia. I remembered how much I loved the story, so I wanted to remind myself why it was great. So this is, if you don't know, a dystopia that is set in England, mainly in like Norfolk area. And it is set, I don't actually know how far in the future. I don't know if it actually ever says, but it's a dystopia. And it is about a group of friends who go to a school, and it becomes quite clear as the book progresses that the school is not normal and they are also not normal. And as the book goes on, we learn a little bit more about their purpose in the world and what they have been sort of created for. A bit vague, but I don't really want to give too many spoilers if you don't know anything about the book or the world. Now, what I just adore about this book is sometimes with like dystopia books you get very sort of caught up in the world building, in understanding like how the world has got to that point in like this dystopia world itself. But I think Never Let Me Go is an exception because it's really not about it being a dystopia. That's like so irrelevant to the plot. It is so much about the human condition and our relationships to each other and our purpose in life, and that applies to these characters as much as it would apply to characters in a contemporary setting. I think there were so many really great explorations of our relationships to each other and like how we hurt each other unintentionally and how we reflect on that and try and do better as people and treat each other with more kindness. And honestly, that's what I really adored about this book. If you know me, if you have watched any of my reviews or read any of my reviews, you'll know how much I love books that just explore the human condition, and this really is the epitome of that. So yeah, I'm really excited to rewatch the movie adaptation because I'm not actually even convinced I've ever seen it, because I've seen so many like stills from it or like the trailer or whatever. Maybe I think I've seen it, but I don't actually know if I have. So I'm definitely going to watch that now that I've read this so soon, because the plot is very fresh in my mind. So yeah, looking forward to that, and this was a 5-star read. Next up is a middle grade read called Rosie Frost and the Falcon Queen, and this is by Jerry Halliwell Horner of the Spice Girls. And this was gifted to me as a PR product. I met Jerry a few weeks ago and we spoke about the book and about how she had written it and like the process she'd gone through to do it, and that was really great, so I really enjoyed that. Now, like I said, this is a middle grade book, and our protagonist Rosie Frost, right at the beginning of the book, her mum dies and she is sent to a different school because of her mother's death. Now, this school is on an island, and it's right from the get-go you can tell it's different. It's not like a normal school. So after only being there, I think a day or maybe 2 days, Rosie learns about the Falcon Queen games, which are games that are held at this school on this island, which she starts to compete in. And the book really just meshes together history with a little bit of fantasy, and then also Rosie's story. Middle grade books, I think, are generally very good at covering quite like deep themes, and Rosie Frost isn't any different. I think it did a really great job of portraying like some really important morals, which for like a middle grade reader is really important. And there's a lot in it about friendship, about being kind, about making friends, and I really loved it for that. I also think the concept itself is really different. Like I said, it kind of really combines history with a little bit of fantasy, and you can really tell that Jerry is really interested in the historical element of the book, and I thought that was really fascinating and really unique. Like, I think a lot of middle grade books with a little bit of fantasy, they always have a little bit of a danger of edging too much into like Harry Potter world, but this really didn't do that, and I did like that the history element of it was so vital to the overall plot, and I think that would again be really great for middle grade readers because it would really pique their interest in history and then perhaps get them to learn more about history generally based off this book. I'm looking forward to seeing where Rosie's story goes and what happens next. So yeah, I think it was really good, and I give it 4 stars overall. Next is the book club pick for Amy's book club for September, which is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katu. This was amazing. Pretty much everyone in my book club loved it. Actually, I think everyone in my book club loved it. It was all like 4, 4.5 or 5-star ratings. everybody loved it. We really couldn't find much fault in it at all. So it is set in Syria at the height of the conflict there, and our main character Salamar has lost everybody. She has lost her mother, her father, her brother, and her home was destroyed, and she currently lives with her sister-in-law Layla, and it is about the two of them trying to survive and contemplating what to do next. Layla is also 7 months pregnant, so that is also quite vital to the storyline and to their situation and deciding what to do next. And Salamar works in a hospital. Now, what's really kind of just fascinating but also shocking for like a reader like me who has never been anywhere near a situation like this is that Salamar is only 18. So this book is a young adult book really, because she is a teenager, but so much of it you will read and it's just, you couldn't even begin to imagine that she is actually an 18-year-old having to do this. She's seeing life and death very much right in front of her every day in the hospital. She has to do surgeries, she has to try and save people's lives, and regularly there'll just be like swathes of people come in with injuries from like shrapnel or bombings or snipers, and she has to try and help these people, often children, and yeah, get through every day. So not only is she having to deal with her own trauma of losing her whole family, she is then also having to deal with the trauma of seeing these people dying every day. So a lot of it very much confronts the perception that we have of like these conflicts that, you know, for people like me who live in the Western world, who, like I said, have never had to deal with a situation like this, can't even comprehend what that is like. It's a really great education on that as well, and just understanding what happened there and what it's like for the people living there. Now, Salamar meets this boy, I don't know, like 100 pages into the book, I think, and he has 2 siblings, and Salamar helps save one of their lives. And so it is about their relationship as well, and again, what they decide to do, because what they are planning on doing is trying to leave the country to go to Germany to escape the violence and the war that is happening in Syria. So it's about trying to decide for them whether they want to leave, what the best thing to do for themselves is, and how to make that decision. And it was very complex, you know. What we spoke about a lot in the book club is how you cannot begin to imagine what kind of decisions you would make until you were in this situation. And there is a little bit of a romance in the book. I wouldn't describe the book overall as a romance because there's so much more to it than that, but there is a little bit of a romance. But also there's so much of like a romance between Salamar and her country. Like, I loved how much of it was just a love letter to Syria and how much she loved her country and how she didn't want to leave it, but ultimately she's trying to do the right thing for her safety, for Layla's safety, for everybody else's safety. You know, she's trying to do the best thing for her and her future, and so that's a really hard decision to make. So yeah, like I said, you know, I can't even begin to comprehend what that would be. And obviously, while this is fictitious, it is based on the real conflict and the real people that had to go through this. So yeah, it's really great for that, just like I said, as an education. But the other thing I spoke about in my book club as well, which I really loved, is it's also like very much about like the little people. Now, I use that phrase quite lightly because I'm not trying to diminish this story or the characters in it at all. But what I mean by the little people is that it's not about the people like the politicians or the leaders or the people trying to change the situation in a big way, but it is about the little protests and the little like impact that all the people who live in that country do, and how that like ricochets, and how ultimately when, you know, all those little protests and all those little things are happening, they do make a difference. And so I really loved that. I loved how, you know, like there were so much moments of like hope and happiness in it despite what was happening. And again, that just showed like their own little protest, like despite the horrors that they were having to go through and these awful things that were happening to them, they are still going to find happiness, they're still going to find love, they're still not going to let it get the better of them. And that was really beautiful. So I can't recommend this book enough. It was amazing. So many people were sobbing throughout it. It's really emotional, but yeah, really beautiful, and I would really recommend, and obviously it is a 5-star read. And finally, my final read of the month, which I finished on the last day of the month, is The Mountains Sing by Nhu Phan Quay Mai. And this is set during the Vietnam War in like the 1970s, but it spans longer than that. So it is historical fiction. I think I've read quite a lot of historical fiction this month actually. But yeah, this one is historical fiction. Now, this is a narration that tells the story of the people who had to live through the Vietnam War, but it spans quite quite a long period of time. So we go from before then, before the conflict started, during, and also after. So it does span quite a long period of time. It jumps through those times as well, which I'll come to in a bit. But yeah, there's quite a lot of movement. It's not just stuck in one place. Now, when I started reading this, or when I was going to read it, added it to my TBR, I was kind of expecting it to be along the lines of like Pachinko or How We Disappeared, if you've read either of them. Again, very much like historical fiction and conflict happening during that. So I was expecting it to be very heavy, traumatic. There's a lot of trigger warnings, so I would really recommend reading those. And ultimately it was that, but I actually think it was so much more than that, which I was very happy about. So our protagonist Huang is about 12 years old, I think, when we first meet her, and she is living with her grandmother in bomb shelters trying to escape the American bombs that are dropping in the area. Now, like, although that's where we start, like I said, it moves backwards in time and forwards in time, and there's a lot of jumping involved. You might know, because I've said this in previous videos, but that's not my favourite narrative structure because I do find it confusing. I think sometimes it's okay, sometimes it can be executed clearly. I think this one was a little bit confusing. I'm not gonna like let that determine how much I enjoyed the book though, because I think that's a personal preference, and it is often done in historical fiction because often it gives you like context, and it's kind of nice to jump back in time to understand like the characters and their situation and what they were doing before the main events, and similarly how everything ended up afterwards. So I do understand completely why it is done, but I just find it a bit hard to follow sometimes, and it was a little bit confusing in this. But anyway, I digress, because I know a lot of people won't be bothered by that, so it's just a personal preference thing. Now, the book had a lot of characters. That is the same for like Pachinko and How We Disappeared as well, because we span quite a lot of period of time, and there's like various different families involved as well. Like, there are just a lot of characters. There's quite a lot of like moving parts and quite a lot of things to keep an eye on. So I think for that I would recommend paying attention. It's not the kind of book you can sort of like skim through and just like leisurely read. I think you do need to be paying attention to fully understand everything that's going on. Now, I thought this book was really brilliantly layered. Like, there was a lot of different things going on, and a lot of different like little just threads of storylines that you just like lightly tugged on every now and again to understand how each of them were connected and how they came together, and I thought that was done really well and executed really well. But what I really loved about this book, more so than probably Pachinko or How We Disappeared, is that it starts off pretty traumatic, pretty heavy, pretty pretty sad, because, you know, given the circumstance of the situation, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of violence, a lot of betrayal, and so yeah, elements of it were really hard to read. But I actually think as the story goes on, it gets more hopeful and more happy, and throughout the whole story, including near the end, there are still elements of that violence and betrayal and death, and that, you know, it's not at any point, it's not an easygoing light read. However, I do really love how it ended. I thought that it kind of came full circle and left us with a little bit more hope than we had at the beginning, which I really, really loved. Similarly to As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, I think this book is brilliant education if you've never read any books that are set in Vietnam. Obviously it's historical fiction, so it's set specifically during the Vietnam War rather than like contemporary Vietnam, but I think it's really good to understand the history of that and the people who lived through it as well and telling their stories. Again, similarly, like, it's a fictitious story, but real people did have to live through that, and I imagine it's well researched and, you know, a reflection of what the real people had to endure and what happened to them. So there are like parts of it that get a little bit sort of like political and a little bit like heavy in that sense, because you kind of have to understand like the context of it, but it's definitely very easy to understand. You don't need to have like a really extensive knowledge of the Vietnam War to understand the plot at all. It just kind of dips into those areas so you can understand like the overall situation and storyline. So yeah, overall I thought it was a really beautiful story. It gets very emotional a lot of the time. There are some really great characters in it though, both good and evil, but the good ones especially, yeah, really beautiful and really lovely, and I love their relationships, and overall I just really love the story. I'm not sure whether it's a 4 or a 5-star read for me. I think maybe if I'm hesitating, I probably should give it 4 stars. And maybe it was because of that time jumping, but that feels unfair. So I think I'll decide in a little bit, but overall I would really recommend it. Okay, so that is everything. Like I said, a pretty good reading month. I think there was 1 3-star read, and apart from that they were all 4 and 5 stars, which is really brilliant. So I'm very happy about that. I have released my October, or posted my October TBR, and I have shocked myself because because there are 2 horror books in there, and I never read horror. I hate it. I get scared really easily, and I don't like having nightmares. So I am looking forward to seeing whether I actually enjoy them. I've been reassured that both of the books I've chosen, they're not like scary horror. They're like only labelled horror for other reasons. So, you know, when I publish my October wrap up, then you'll be able to see how much I actually enjoyed them and whether I decided to DNF them because they were too scary. So we will see. But anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this. I will try and post some more videos this month because I wasn't very good at posting any last month. So I will try and do some more in October. But I hope you have enjoyed. Please like this video and please subscribe to my channel if you did enjoy it. And I will see you next time. Bye!